Hello music makers, welcome back. After a few years running a music channel, inevitably I've had plenty of questions regarding copyright. And a couple of weeks ago in the Easy Starts video, I talked about how I was committing copyright infringement in one of those methods. But I left off a crucial piece of information. In fact, a single word is all I forgot to say. And in forgetting that, I have caused a little bit more confusion and a couple more questions. So now seems like a good time to tackle the subject. Let's go. Okay, first we have to do this bit. A disclaimer, I am not a lawyer, that's an attorney for our American friends, and this is not legal advice. Laws can be different in different countries, states, and laws change. In fact, in the time it took me to write this script, the US Copyright Office has already changed their stance on AI-generated music. Laws can also change if a big corporation throws enough money at it. Disney. So if you need legal advice, please seek out a legal professional in your country or relevant territory. Thank you for listening. Back to the video. So here's the main overview. When we talk about music copyright, we are not actually talking about one thing. It's two things. There are two main music copyrights you need to be concerned with. And it's easy to remember them if you just take a minute to think about how music has come to be. So, if we rewind time a couple hundred years or so, there was a time where if you wanted to listen to tunes, you had to go to a gig or pick up an instrument yourself and play that. Also, there was no amplification, no microphones, no speakers. It was all acoustic instruments played live by people. But what were they playing? Well, if it wasn't random or improvised, in order to be able to repeat music and get groups to play together, some clever people came up with a method of writing it all down. You may have seen it before. It looks like this. Now, prior to the early 1800s, other people's ideas were kind of fair game. In fact, it was a mark of respect if you included someone else's melody in your piece, like a nod to your peers, as it were. But in 1831, someone decided that these written down pieces were just like books. And because for over 100 years books had been protected by copyright, they decided to extend book copyright to include music too. So this is where we get the term publishing. Because now, just like you could print and publish a book, you can now print and publish music. And the ownership of that music would be protected by copyright. Back then, it lasted 28 years. Now, fast forward around 50 years, a prolific American inventor called Thomas Edison, yes, the same Thomas Edison that everyone debates whether he invented the light bulb or not, that guy, he invents a thing called the phonograph, a way of capturing sound onto wax and playing it back. The phonograph started out looking a bit like this and would eventually evolve into the familiar design we all know and love today. In fact, we still use wax as a slang term for vinyl records. So this was a true revolution, right? People could finally experience music outside of live performance. But as with all new technology, new questions are raised. Specifically, what happens now if you purchase a piece of published music, perform it yourself, and record that performance? Who owns that? And if that recording is sold, who gets paid? Well, believe it or not, it took 7 decades of arguing between governments, artists, record labels, writers, and it wasn't until 1971 that this would be settled. Very recently in the great scheme of things, it was finally decided that recordings were their own copyright. So now music had 2 copyrights: the publishing, the song as it was originally written down, and the recording, the version of that song as it is committed to a recorded medium, such as wax, vinyl, tape, or today, on a computer hard drive, for example. And that's basically where we are today. The 2 copyrights still stand. And we still largely use those terms, publishing copyright and recording copyright. Although now you will hear some other words used too. For publishing, you may hear the terms composition, musical composition, songwriting, writing, or musical work. All of those in the context of copyright are just different words for publishing. As for recording copyright, you may also hear the term master, short for master recording. And if you ever sign a deal with a record label, don't be surprised to see the original term phonograph recording in there. I think the best example that cements the two copyrights in my mind is probably cover songs. Under this name, Bthelick, my most successful track is a cover of Chris Isaak's Wicked Game. And whenever my version of that track generates any money, the two copyrights get paid separately to their respective authors. So the songwriting royalties, the publishing royalties, those will go to Chris Isaak and or his publisher. And because it's my recording, my performance of his song, all the recording royalties go to me and the other performers on that record. Now, it's also worth mentioning, in order to make that recording, I had to seek permission and I had to obtain a license. Now, here's a fun fact. I did warn earlier that the law can change. When I recorded my cover, Wicked Game was 30 years old. So if the original copyright term of 28 years was still in place, I wouldn't have needed permission or a license. Sadly though, this is no longer the case, mostly because of Disney, believe it or not. There were a few incremental extensions to copyright throughout history, but the biggest two are because of Disney. Every time the copyright to Mickey Mouse was close to expiring, Disney would lobby the government hard, or in other words, throw cash at important people so that they would not lose control over Mickey Mouse. And as of 1998, the length of copyright now stands at 75 years. That's in the US, and it's 70 years in the UK. But get this, that time does not include from the start of the copyright. It is 75 or 70 years from the death of the original author. I don't know about you, but that seems insane to me, especially when you compare it to a patent, for example. If you make a revolutionary invention which changes the world, like Thomas Edison did, you get 20 years to take advantage of that. Whereas if you happen to write a little piece of music in the 1970s when you were 20 years old, and I want to sample it, but you won't let me, I might be waiting for another 70-odd years. Well, I won't, because I'd be dead. Now, we can't cover copyright on a dance music channel without talking about remixing, because some people do get confused between cover songs and remixing. Covering a song has a more standardized definition than remixing does. A cover is a new recording of an existing written song, whereas a remix, in the modern context at least, usually refers to using part of the original recording to make a new version of that song. And whereas cover songs have a standard practice, like I described earlier, where the original author gets the songwriting royalties and you get your new recording royalties, for remixing, there is no standard practice, really. It's all down to each individual contract. In the last couple of decades, in my experience at least, the majority of the time is that no royalties are paid to the remixer at all. The remix is commissioned by the author or some representative party, like the record label or the publisher. They ask for the remix, they pay a single fee for that remix, they take ownership of the whole thing, and that's it. That's the official route anyway. I have been asked about unofficial remixes. What's going on with those? Sometimes you hear these called bootlegs, and as they are unofficial, obviously there's no contract. There's usually no permission, and in terms of copyright, it's an infringement of both copyrights. Because if the remix involved sampling part of the original, that's recording copyright, and obviously within that recording is a pre-written song, so that's publishing copyright. So in simple terms, it's illegal. And you'll often find DJs exchange these bootlegs between each other for live performance only. In fact, there's whole groups set up to do this. Now, technically, performing one of these out live is not illegal because the venue has a public performance license, or should have anyway. So essentially, that makes them no different from the DJ just playing other people's records as normal. However, this has given rise to a dangerous myth. Because these bootlegs are typically for live only and not for release, that has led some to speculate that it is only copyright infringement if some money is being made from it. And that is absolutely not true. Free or paid, making money or not, is not a factor when considering copyright infringement. Money is only a factor in the sense that if something goes viral and starts to get noticed around the world, then somebody somewhere is probably making some money, and the chances of them receiving a phone call in the near future has just gone up. Speaking of contracts, understanding the two copyrights can help you there too. Now, as I said with the remixing, every contract is different, but here is the main overview. There are two ends of the scale. On one end, we can agree to a single payment, with that being the entire transaction. After that, we walk away and there's no comeback. This is sometimes called a buyout, or you may also hear it called work for hire. And this can be for either copyright, publishing, recording, or both. It's called buyout because the person paying is buying you out of your rights. For example, imagine you are a singer or rapper or MC. You turn up to the studio, you're asked to write a top line for a track and asked to perform it also. On a work for hire contract, you are paid for your time and your work, but all of that content now belongs to the person who paid for it. Even though you technically wrote lyrics and/or melody, in a buyout scenario, you will not receive any songwriting royalties because it is agreed that the payment made has also bought those off you. So that's buyout and work for hire. Now, at the other end of the scale, the opposite of that. No payment for performance or writing. Instead, the work is done in return for royalties. In this scenario, our imaginary singer still writes and performs, but instead of a payment for that performance, an agreement is made on how to split up any royalties that that track may generate. For example, everyone may agree that the singer takes 30%. So those are the two extremes. Either take a payment and walk away, or no payment and receive some royalties. But it's a sliding scale. Every option exists in between, a little bit of each. And don't forget, there are two copyrights. So this can be different and usually is for each one. So let me wrap this up with another example in the form of an apology. In the intro earlier, I mentioned a mistake. In the Easy Starts video, I used AI to rip the drums out of a track so I could start my idea faster. And I warned everyone that this is copyright infringement. It's just to be there temporarily while we put the track together. And I had a couple of questions along the lines of, how is it possible to copyright such a simple beat? That beat isn't original, other people have done it before. And you can see the problem. I completely understand the train of thought. They were probably correct in terms of publishing copyright, the writing side. Because yes, it was very much a standard house beat, and it's going to be pretty hard to argue in a court of law that that is original enough to warrant being copyrighted. So what I should have done is said recording copyright infringement. This is recording copyright infringement. Because even if that beat sounds very similar to another beat, their recording of it is unique to them. And in sampling it, I am infringing on whoever owns that recording copyright. I'm extra embarrassed over that mistake because about a year ago, Venus Theory did a video called The Splice Problem, and I left him a big essay in the comments because I was annoyed how he didn't separate publishing and recording copyright, and doing so would have changed his argument. Now, here's me a year later making the same mistake. Well, almost. It doesn't affect that tutorial, but still, I should have spotted it. So my apologies. Okay, that's all we'll say on the matter for now. By the way, if you find this kind of stuff fascinating, I recommend checking out Top Music Attorney on YouTube, if she's not appeared in your feed already, that is. I personally really appreciate the fact we have a dedicated music legal channel on YouTube now, not just a broader legal channel like Legal Eagle. So check her out. But before you do, if you appreciated this video, please press some buttons that help me out, or there's a link in the description to buy me a coffee if you're so inclined. And until next week, I will see you in the comments. Bye-bye.